all others is economic opportunity and how to make the south side of Virginia and central Virginia thriving economic leaders in the Commonwealth again. I understand it. That's why the National Federation of Independent Businesses just gave us their endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Tom Gardner, first up for the next question, I believe. If studies show that industrial hemp would be a valuable crop for farmers in the region, is there any way you could support allowing the growing of industrial hemp as a biofuel and source of quality paper and clothing?
I already have. There was an industrial hemp bill before the General Assembly a couple of years ago. I don't understand why we see a growth industry like hemp. Virginia is situated geographically in a region that would make us essentially one of the best areas to grow hemp in the world. It's an organic product that replenishes the soil if we were to rotate crops, and it would provide economic opportunity in agrarian societies and rural agricultural areas like the south side of this district where it's leaving in the form of tobacco. So because hemp is first cousin to marijuana, we should turn our backs on those jobs. I think that sort of draconian thinking is outmoded, outdated, and I think that this millennial generation, if not our generation and your generation and everyone's generation that wants to see growth and opportunity, will set aside a molecular difference of a scintilla in favor of opportunity. So yeah, I would absolutely support that. I don't know why we aren't there yet. We need to get there. And so not only would I support it, I would lead the charge, I think, on ensuring that greater economic opportunity presents itself to the farmer as the lifeblood of the 5th District of Virginia.
Thank you, Tom Gardner. Jane Denton.
Yes, I absolutely support it. I've talked to farmers south of us all the way to south side, those especially involved in tobacco farming. It would be an ideal crop for their almost fallow land now. I would like to mention that when we were looking at how we could grow agribusiness, you cannot bring companies to an area that does not have internet. It's an infrastructure that is essential. And so you can look at all the different ways to attract business, and if you don't have it, they're not coming. And businesses that hire consultants to find new places to go will tell you that. I would like to mention about the breweries. We are doing very well in the Central Virginia area. Our unemployment rate is below what we call full employment. We do have an underemployment problem in that people need even better jobs, especially middle-class jobs. And I think that what we want to do is to work on appropriate places for them to be. The reason why Deschutes and other good employers are not coming to Albemarle County is because we have a paucity of land that is already zoned properly for them. We were lucky, and I worked with the governor on this, that we kept Deschutes in Virginia. We were actually competing with North Carolina, and I am sick of losing jobs to North Carolina. So anyway, yes to hemp. We shouldn't look at that as a marijuana issue, but unfortunately it's gotten a little confused, and I think we will see it as a legal product in the future here in Virginia.
Thank you, Jane Denton. You have first crack at the next question, which is, will you work to bring the Voting Rights Act of 1965 back on the table to address the pre-clearance section of that act that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled invalid?
I think if I'm understanding the question, what we're talking about is some of the weakening of the 1965 Act. What we were hopeful for is that our states would behave themselves and that we would relax these requirements on them. What we have found is that's not the case, and so we now have litigation. One, I think, just went before the Supreme Court. So yes, I would like to tighten back up on those regulations and make sure that there's teeth in enforcing them.
Thank you, Jane Denton. Tom Garrett?
So I don't know. I drive 20 south from Charlottesville to Scottsville all the time, and I can't get a cell signal. So I don't know who was responsible for putting cell towers in on 20 South or 29 coming out of the city. But by golly, it might be nice to get private sector cell service before we start talking about government internet service. Maybe Albemarle's board supervisor can speak to that. I was actually at the governor's mansion the night that the Deschutes people came and visited. Flan and I were there and met with them with Governor McCall. If it was an interesting meeting. And I'm glad too that they came to Virginia and didn't go to North Carolina. And as it relates to the Voting Rights Act, we need clarification from the federal courts what exactly is valid and is not valid in the Voting Rights Act right now, because Virginia was out of compliance with the ruling on the Voting Rights Act because it was in compliance with the prior ruling on the Voting Rights Act. So as with so many issues, the federal government's presented a moving target for the states to try to hit. So you had a 3rd congressional district in Virginia that literally ran down the middle of the James River where no one lived, and I think 2 different places to comply with the Voting Rights Act, which was later ruled illegal because the courts changed how they interpreted the Voting Rights Act. So what we need is a federal government that is brave enough to tell us what the right thing to do is and then stand by it without changing it midstream while the states work to comply. So many of the problems that we see, and a large part of the reason I'm running in Virginia, are driven by people in Washington who are afraid to tell us when up is up and down is down and what's right and what's wrong. We need clarity from the federal government on the Voting Rights Act, and then we need to ensure that everyone has the right to vote fairly and freely.
Thank you, Tom Garrett. You're up first on the next question. Do you acknowledge that the burning of fossil fuels causes climate change?
I absolutely, positively believe that climate change is real. I believe that as long as there's been a climate, it's been changing. The question then becomes, and certainly it will continue, the question then becomes one of whether it's man-caused climate change. If the indications are that the climate change that we experience is man-caused, then we need to look at what we can do to put those into check, and we need to do a cost-benefit analysis of the amount of change that can be made by actions that we can take in order to bring these things under control. However, we know there's climate change. There is debate as to whether it's man-caused climate change, and there's real debate.
Let's let the candidate respond, please.
There is debate over whether it's man-caused climate change, and so the question then becomes one of cost-benefit analysis and what we can do to temper that climate change. If the United States acts unilaterally, then we will lose a significant deal more than others with what is to be gained to be debated down the road. So what we need to do is take a long, hard look at both sides of the science, determine what amount of the climate change is man-caused, determine what amount of the climate change is man-caused, and then act appropriately after doing a cost-benefit analysis of what we give up and what we gain by that action.
Thank you, Tom Garrett. Same question for Tom. Do you acknowledge that the burning of fossil fuel causes climate change?
Well, first of all, climate change is a reality. We do agree on that. There are factors that are causing climate change that may not be man-made, but there are a whole lot that are. Fossil fuel emissions are warming up our atmosphere, and I work with local governments all over Virginia that are dealing with adaptation strategies now. We need to go at this 2 ways. One, how do we adapt? We must adapt. The other is, how do we mitigate or slow it down? And that will require us taking a long, hard look at our relationship with fossil fuels. Now, we can't just say we're not going to use fossil fuels. Our economy depends on energy, as do we in our homes. But we need to move gracefully into natural gas and really stimulate our renewable, clean energy sector in the future.
The next question is looming debt and entitlement obligations. What policies will you bring forward to address the future of our grandchildren?
Sometimes I'm asked, what do I think is the greatest threat to my children's future? And if it's not climate change, it is the national debt. And we need to take that very seriously. With almost $20 trillion in debt, if we don't get after that soon, we are going to have a real problem here in the United States, where interest eats away all the different things that we need the federal government to be involved with. Number one, I really reject the idea that we should be talking about let's do a tax increase or a tax decrease. We need to take our tax code and put everything on the table and only through good negotiation decide what to put back in. We have such a chaotic tax code that we don't know what we're earning and what we're not earning, and that needs to change. Additionally, we need to look at our priorities, decide what percentages of our budget should be funded that way, and then we need to see where our cuts can go. I am very disturbed with any Virginia elected official that would vote to shut down our government or even for sequestration. This Commonwealth is impacted the worst of the entire country when we do budgeting that way. So we need to do hard work, roll up our sleeves, not take recesses, and get to work on that sort of thing.
Thank you, Jane. Tom, same question.
So again, I want to give you answers and not platitudes. It's easy to talk about hard work and good negotiation and looking at priorities and seeing where cuts could go, but specificity really is what people deserve. And so we have a president who said that $7 trillion in national debt was unpatriotic, and 7.5 years later we're closing on $20 trillion, which I can only do basic math, but that'd be about unpatriotic times 3. So how do we solve problems? What are specific things we can do to maintain and keep the promises that we made to posterity, to everyone in this room? My mom is dependent upon Social Security. And Social Security's viability is up for debate. And so what we have proposed in this campaign is a program that will ensure that everyone who has earned the right to a Social Security check would have nothing to worry about for perpetuity, and that would alleviate student loan crises and debts that have been incurred by this current generation. Young people put off getting married. They put off buying cars. They put off buying homes. So how can you do it? What are your specifics? You allow young people who come out of college with student loan debt the opportunity to defer receipt of Social Security benefits. In return, they receive student loan forgiveness. If you did this for up to 10 years, it wouldn't change a single promise made to any senior citizen currently receiving Social Security, and it wouldn't change the promise to any of these students. What would it allow them to do is to get out from underneath the bubble of debt that stops them from buying a home, that crushes our real estate market, that stops them from buying a car, that stops them from getting married, and makes it unaffordable for them to live in outstanding communities like those here in Central Virginia. So specific solutions that allow people to make choices, don't change the promises made to anyone, and allow us to then have the money to allow the promise of Social Security to be kept for perpetuity, and not platitudes and blanket statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom Baker. Tom Baker, we're combining 2 questions for the next responses, and you answer first. Why did you help Dominion Power escape public oversight in rate setting for the next 10 years, and will you continue to take money from Dominion like you have in the past?
Dominion Power was subject to a draconian scheme of federal regulation as it related to emissions that took the power profiles of our states and did not take into consideration how responsible or clean the power generation in those states was. So for example, in Virginia, 36% of all power generated is clean in the form of nuclear generated at Surrey and North Anna. Whereas in West Virginia, the vast bulk of the power generation that they had was coal-based. And so what the federal government said was, cut your emissions by half. Well, with the exception of states in the Pacific Northwest like Washington, who use a massive amount of hydroelectric power, Virginia, relative to its peers, was doing a wonderful job. But the federal rulemaking, that is laws promulgated by those not elected to create laws, put them in a situation where they had to find a way to survive and continue to produce, relative to our neighbors, a largely clean fuel portfolio. And so giving them a little bit of latitude along those lines did exactly that. And I would suggest that if you look at the folks who voted in favor of doing this, that you'll see a bipartisan swath of the General Assembly, just like those with whom I worked on things like K-12 ed reform, because it made sense for the ratepayers and the power producers, and it didn't make sense to punish Dominion for producing more clean energy than states like West Virginia and other neighboring states did to begin with by imposing draconian numbers games that didn't recognize the good work they were already doing.
Thank you, Tom Garrett. Jim, Didmar, same question, except we'll make it your position on Dominion's public oversight and your position on taking Dominion contributions.
Thank you. Who prevents the State Corporation Commission from looking at rate requests from Dominion Power? Dominion Power can make the same case each time they appear before the State Corporation Commission about the kinds of investment they're making. But to have no oversight, to give that up by legislative votes.